Hello, I'm Rob, welcome to Rob's Models, and today we are looking at my finally completed build of Revell's Apollo Saturn V rocket in 1:144 scale, and this is reference number 04909. And here it is, finally done. Now, this is a project that actually started almost 4 years ago. If you actually look back on YouTube, I'd done an unboxing review of this, and it was actually one of my first videos. It was more just me just playing around with a video camera before I really started Rob's Models and those sort of things. I done a bit of filming, forgot about it, and actually got out of modelling and got other things going. And but every now and again, I'll take some photos of the build as this progressed, and finally we've got to this stage. And actually, the build itself was actually completed well over a year ago. Could have been about 2 now. What slowed me down was actually just the base, because I just wanted to, well, the base that come with it was just a block of grey plastic. Oh yeah, okay, you could give it a paint, but the way it just sort of sat on there, clipped in place, and the actual 5 engines were buried within it, so you couldn't see any engines, so there was no detail there, so it looked just like a white tube stuck on a bit of grey plastic. So I thought, actually, if you've got those engines there, you want to sort of show them off a little bit. I had been having it on display just horizontally on the shelves behind me, but that obviously takes up quite a bit of room. And it does look a little bit more dynamic like this. I'm not trying to replicate flame at the bottom, but I'm trying to give a bit of an impression of it, is probably the best way to put it. So yeah, if you sort of see, I've just tried to do a bit of a base, just so it's kind of looking like it's just lifting off. So that's what really, you know, to be honest, if you'd been watching the previous videos, that's really all I've done since the last video. But instead of just talking about how I've just made this little base, let's just have a little bit of a look at the whole rocket itself. Now, as you can see, it's definitely pretty tall. It's about a metre, I think, you know, from tip to the bottom there. So it is quite a beast. Now, I've got to say, this is not the best tooling. This kit, the kit itself, no matter, ignoring what the box art is, those sort of things, the actual moulds of the plastic, well, it was actually released in 1968. And if you know, that's actually a year before the man actually landed on the moon. So this was out at the time when, you know, these things were in prototype stage. So essentially what Revell, or Monogram at the time, tried to do was to basically cash in on people wanting to, you know, build models of the Saturn V rocket literally as they were getting built and taken off and heading to the moon. Which is fair enough. Just a pity they haven't updated the kit since, because for a subject this big, and I don't just mean in size, it is something where I'm surprised no major manufacturers, and again the same goes with Airfix, haven't taken the time to actually update the plastic mouldings. But I guess it's quite a simple sort of moulding, and to be honest, they probably sell enough of them, it's not worth the hassle doing it. So what are we looking at there? Well, we are looking at a big rocket. So let's just have a quick summary of what we've actually got. So it's essentially a big plastic tube, and the main part of it was built, each of these sections built with 2 halves coming together, and they do go in sections. Now, when looking at it like this, it is sort of quite impressive. However, there's not a great amount of detail on the outside, and even, I mean, you could say, well, it's not a huge amount there, but I think some of the detail, especially things like the engines, definitely could be a lot more detailed. That might be why they decided to try to bury them away with that base that they made for it, because they weren't really that great, and things don't really fit too well. This is almost sort of like, you know, you can take it to bits so you can have the different stages. However, if you do that, then there's even less detail on the internal parts. I'm guessing partly is just because they couldn't get there. The designers of this had to make things up because the original versions were still in trial. You know, this was probably getting tooled at the same time they were making the prototypes for the real Saturn V rocket. So there are going to be some discrepancies, and I'm guessing a bit of designer, you know, they had to take a few guesses, I think, on things. I mean, the bulk of it is going to be the same, but the finesse details. The other thing is as well, you kind of got to decide if you're making this, are you going to be doing it? And if I was to do this again, there's 2 different routes you would go. I've done the best of both worlds route, which is really how it's marketed, but you're not getting the best of either, you're kind of getting an average of either. You either have it displayed like this, where it is complete, and in that case, what I would do is to, let me just remove it from the base. There we go, I have actually fixed it onto the base, with some blue tack. There we go, it's a lot lighter now. So you have got things like these, there we go, got where the stages come together, they don't fit very well. There's definitely this collar here is smaller, it's a slightly smaller diameter. There's a millimetre lip going right the way around there. When it comes to that top part of the collar, again, doesn't quite line up properly. Although I've tried to sort of, obviously a lot of filler, a lot of sanding, a lot more filler and a lot more sanding was going down, bringing these two halves together. Where you've got the ridges, it's still a bit obvious where things, didn't quite, there we go, just caught the shadow of it. That stands out a lot more just at the certain angles. I mean, other angles, it's fine. If you look straight on, you don't see it. Get it at an angle where it catches a shadow, suddenly it's quite obvious. And where this this is quite a beast of a kit, and where this petal system opens out at the top stage to reveal the lunar lander, you've got big gaps. Now what I would do is and again, sort of just gaps where, because this is, it all comes, it comes to pieces, things come off. It's a great educational tool, but because of that, you don't have, you are having these fit issues. Now what I would do is, if I was going to say I'm going to display it like this, what would happen is I would not bother with any of the internal details, put it together like this, but glue all of this into place, you could really go to town with a filler on it, knowing it's not going to be coming to pieces, because you wouldn't be having those massive gaps that you have there. And you can kind of try to put it into place, but yeah, you can see just sort of, it's because these are movable parts, they naturally move. So what's the alternative? Well, the other alternative is to display internal detail. And the great thing with this is that you can explain how this, basically, essentially, how man got to the moon and got back again with this. It's basically an educational tool, if you like. So you could go through the process of it, took off from the launch pad like this, using those rockets there. And in this section, you had your oxidizer and your fuel. And then what would happen is once that fuel ran out, then that would separate, that would kick off. Let's pop that aside just for a moment. Actually, I've actually fixed that in place. But then that collar as well, this section here, top section here, would also be able to come off. So that is actually a collar there where that lip is actually, but I didn't think I'd glued it in place. It was a while back now, but I think it might have just been on there so long that I don't want to start snapping off the little catches on there. But you can see you have got a fuel tank in there. Oh, hang on, there we go. So you can see, yeah, you've got a fuel tank in there. So actually, whilst we've got this in our hand, let's look at this bit. So engines on the bottom isn't huge amount of detail. Ignore right at the bottom, that's some bits of blue tack that I've actually put in the bottom of the engine nozzles, and you can actually see that there is no, there's no holes right the way in. What is quite bad though is with the engines, the seam lines. I have filed away, but they are quite big on the inside as well. And again, this might be why they wanted to try to bury it away. You have got a bit of detail in there, and you might look at it and say, well, actually, you see where there's that compressor pump there running down the side. I've actually done a few and I'd lost my patience with that. So there you can sort of see through, they're two separate parts. However, they weren't moulded like that. They were actually moulded like that one, where it actually just was in one. So what I ended up doing was some of those, I couldn't be bothered to do it because I lost my patience. It was what I started losing my mojo with it, and so I've done it from one way where you can look from one way, you'll see through, which is the side that would more be presented. However, if you look the other way, then that is the solid mouldings. You're not seeing the air between the actual nozzle and that compressor pump there. So there is some detail on there. Where they did come together, it was definitely filing those, trying to keep those ridges of the going around there. And if you were going to be doing it properly, and I think if you really were wanting to display this off, you would want to do more work, add a bit more. I mean, I was going to, that was the plan. I just lost my patience with it, and I thought if I'm going to do it, just get on and get it done, to be honest. That was my thinking. So not knocking it completely, put a bit of a wash in there just to get some detail, and as you can see, it is actually picking out a bit. These things were clean. Of course, there's been no weathering on here like you would do with a plane. These things were built in a very, very clean condition. rolled out under the Florida sunshine and taking off. But you can see there is definitely gap fit issues all around here. I thought it's going to be buried away, it's not going to be seen, but if you're displaying it in a way that I think could be displayed, you'd want to put a lot more work into that, and that was actually going to be the initial plan. I did want to sort of show this off. So yeah, you've got, I mean, toy-like, and yeah, I think it's sort of fine but not great. The problem is when we come to this stage, so this is the next bit, these are the next rockets, and you might initially look at it and go, well, actually that's fine, you've got the 5 little rocket nozzles, but how's the fuel actually getting to that rocket nozzle? There's just gaps there. Yeah, obviously the designers, that's just a thin plate. You've actually got holes there. Now, if you were to be displaying this properly, you would have to then scratch build a whole load of pipe work to get basically the fuel from the bottom here, the fuel and air mixtures, into the engine. So they've kind of put the nozzles on there, but no gubbins there. Now, and again, if this is sealed up, no problem, you're not going to see that. But if you're taking it to pieces to display it for educational, fine. To explain how this bit comes off, there's some 5 more rockets there, yeah, excellent, move on, perfect. However, if you're going to be displaying it, that is a cop-out, to be honest. It's pretty embarrassing. But anyway, let's go on with it. So this then separates. Oh, there we go. And so that would come off and then gets discarded. Now let's just move on to here. So before I come to that bit, we'll just put that aside. So this part here, yeah, that's all well and good, not very good there, but then we look here, what have we got there? If you look in there, there's not the top of a fuel tank. Well, there is top of a fuel tank, but there's also a great big hole in there. The hole in there is, of course, so the nozzle, which that one actually has got a bit of, and actually these are the same engines that should be on the bottom there. So you can see that the actual nozzle is the same, but that sort of pipe work should be what comes out the top of those. So actually, if they'd moulded that one, why didn't they essentially try to take a version of that to put there? That's just odd. That really is cutting corners for the sake of cutting corners. But you can see that would actually, the height difference pushes that down to that level, which is actually within the fuel tank. Very odd. So I think they obviously took a bit of liberties there trying to work that one out. Again, fine for educational, but if you look at it logically, it doesn't make sense. So that's that stage. Then once so that's now got us into orbit. Oh, what would have happened is, of course, once they had got above a certain, the escape tower would have been jettisoned as well. So now we're up to this stage in Earth orbit. So you can see how it all comes apart there. Then once we're in Earth orbit, the actual command module separates. There we go. This opens out, and there we go. He's falling in there. So now we've got our lunar excursion module in there, the LEM. This would then come around, dock like that. But here we go. That has got. Okay, I won't push it right the way in, but you get the idea. That would drag that out. That now gets left to go in the Earth's atmosphere. And you can kind of see, yeah, that kind of works again in principle, but not exactly the finest of details. Those hinges are also what that sits on. You've got a bit of a fuel tank in there as well. But you can sort of see how it's more designed more for the model's point of view. So that attaches there, like so. That goes off now to visit the moon, goes in orbit around the moon. Then, yeah, I won't push that right the way in at the moment, but you kind of get the idea how that just locks in there. Separates at the moon. This now goes down to the surface of the moon. Those open out. We are now on the moon's surface, so we've got our little lunar lander. Not a great amount of detail, to be perfectly honest. And once they've actually done their walking around on the moon, that now comes off. And now, oh, there we are. We get to take off from there. Now that little part comes back up again. That flies back off with your Buzz Aldrin and I forgot his name, Neil Armstrong in there. Comes back to orbit, reconnects, that joins. your astronauts get back in here, that turns around, back. Now again, looking at this, that is all very simple, not much in the way of detail on there. You have got a little engine on the bottom, those sort of things. So it's kind of there, just not very there. You also have throughout it, of course, little catches and those sort of things as well, which are not obviously prototypical. So like on there and on there, you know, where it's actually, you know, linking in. The weird thing is those are actually glued on as well. They're not kind of molded on. So you've got to make sure you use a good glue to get that on. And then once we get back to Earth, then the actual, that bit comes off, pops off, and then it is just this last little bit with the 3 astronauts, returns back for splashdown. So, phew, okay. You can see how that is, you know, something from that big, and that's all that returns, and how the whole process goes. And I've got to say, that is great. However, the quality of it isn't so great. I mean, things like on the side of here, where the paint is, and, you know, so if you actually look at the original, you know, pictures, and so I sort of like, you know, put the paint on and masked up the bits of white over the silver. It doesn't actually line up with actual you know, detail that's been moulded in. So that's a little bit odd. Obviously, they just had to. I mean, these sort of parts weren't sort of possibly, you know, completely signed off, but they were still in development at the time when they were tooling this kit. That's why. And so then looking at the pictures. Oh, there you can just see the top in that bit there. That's the cryo tanks. So you know, that was one of those of the tanks that actually blew up and took the side panel off on Apollo 13's trip to the moon. So yeah, you can see, you know, you can point out those little parts. So from that side of things, it's fine. Now, I would say though, it's definitely not toy-like. You wouldn't give this to kids to play with, because you do have to be careful. As I said earlier, those little catches, those little clasps, those are actually just glued in. So I use the Tamiya Extra Thin to essentially bond it to weld it. But I think if you were just going to be using something like the Revell glue, I do think that wouldn't last very long until that would be, you know, snapping off. So earlier I said you could present it like I had, in a way that you're actually showing it all in one. I think the best way though to present this kit would be like they've actually done at Cape Canaveral, where they've actually laid it out, and I have seen other people do this and it's done really well. You would need a lot of time and a lot of patience, where essentially you would put it on a stand. So you'd have this bit like this, you would have this bit here opened out. So if we were to come to here, you would see that would be like that, and then you would have this part here. So all those stages sort of laid out. I know you are going to be having a display though. The display itself is going to be well over 1 metre long. You're looking at about a 4 foot long display for it. You'd have to have it all on a plinth with everything all lifted up, essentially replicating what they have actually done at Cape Canaveral. The problem is with that is then you are showing off all those internal details, and that's why you would really need to go to town on researching, you know, working out, you know, how big this nozzle, and, you know, should this actually be shorter? Is the reason they've made a hole in there because, you know, they've made this too long? Perhaps that shouldn't be, you know, that should be filled in and not, you know, you're going to need to do that sort of research, especially when it comes to this second stage. You're going to have to do a lot of scratch building in there. Again, it would be fun if that's your thing. That would be great and great value. You would end up with, you know, something really good. You know, you can add some more details onto things. So definitely, from that point of view, it is, yeah, that's why I say they've tried to do it the best of both worlds, but they've really actually got the average of both worlds, because it's neither one nor the other. So if you were to decide up front what you're going to be doing, then and then go for that way and go, right, that's how I'm doing it. Am I doing it all in one unit, or am I splitting it down and going to make a really big project out of it? But you would end up with something amazing at the end. So they've kind of given you the basics, but also things like, you know, you've got the fit issues here, but things like these, you know, some of these ridges and things, they're not, when you actually look at them in profile, they look, when you're just sort of looking down at them, yeah, they look just like, you know, the ridges. And again, this is sort of like whites on white, so it's a bit tricky to see. But and again, with this being white, you can't really weather this up to bring the detail, highlight the detail. I was tempted to do it, but you've just kind of got to stick with it being white, because these things were just pure black and pure white, which you'd never normally use if you're doing aircraft or something. But these are kind of more steps. They're done in a way to make them easier to get out the moulds, and that does mean that you do have some more of those sort of ridges. Now, if I was going to be doing this from scratch again, which I'm not, what I probably would do is I'd be tempted just to pretty much sand all of that down again. Again, it would be a big job, and with strips of plastic card, thin plastic card, perhaps, not saying would do, but perhaps, or at least replace some of them. And yeah, again, going with the engines, but that's what I'm talking about, is you would really need to go to town with it. And like you can see here, you have got sort of seam issues. Looking down, you can sort of see that, yeah, that's not a complete circular join. I've had to put a bit of filler in there. From a distance, and depending on what rotating, you don't see it, but as you do get in closer, that's when you start seeing these imperfections, which probably would have been fine in the 60s. If you're literally making this because you are watching, you know, you're getting caught up in the space race, and you are watching, you know, Neil and Buzz take off and land on the moon, and what you want to do is to be able to play moon yourself. This is what it really was designed for. However, things have moved on over the last 50 years, and now, you know, I do think it is calling out for a better version of this. However, if you don't mind either agreeing with these compromises or realising those up front, then you will have, you know, you have got a basics for a good kit. And if you wanted to do it literally a sort of 4 foot long laid out on a plinth, that would look amazing. What other people have done is, if you're going for the takeoff thing, is to actually get it on the, basically replace the stand, much like I have, but a better version of it. So with this, what I have actually done was simply got a block of wood, actually it's 2 bits of wood stuck together, drilled some holes in, and these are actually pens. I had some pens which were just plastic biro pens. They were sort of silvered colour, rubbed them down, gave them a coat of white primer, then I put on some yellow, and then on top of that put on a bit of red, just to kind of give that flame effect. So there's more yellow at the bottom. I'm not trying to replicate flame. I've seen great ones of these where people have used cotton wool to basically make that big steam and smoke cloud underneath, putting LEDs in it to light up, and it does look amazing. However, I haven't got space for that. I wanted something, so it's actually got a very small footprint. This is only 9 centimetres by 9 centimetres, or roughly, it's not quite square, but yeah, you're looking 3 inches by 3 inches, less than that. So for a big model, it actually takes up a very small footprint. What I've done is just put some blue tack. Well, the blue tack's now stuck on the bottom, but I did put some, actually it's stuck on one of those there, blue tack just on there, just because it did sit, but I wanted just some little dabs of blue tack just to keep it a little bit more stable, just for rigidity. So if it gets knocked, it's a lot more stable on there. So you can see I can wobble that around, and that's fine. I did try my best to get it level. So again, I'm not trying to say that is flame. I'm more just actually trying to imply that, you know, that is flame. But what it means is, what you can do is to look at the engine detail, which isn't that great. So I'm not really massively trying to show it off, but you can sort of see that if you were to look into it, you can actually, on the desk, you could look up and you can see a bit more of the detail, which you couldn't do with the original stand. You can see a bit of the detail under there, and if you were to spend that extra bit of time taking off those compressors and actually putting in a bit more pipe work, which you could quite easily do if you want to, then that's a way to show that off, but then have it essentially all built up. So let's just put it back together. Now, one of the major gripes that I actually had with this is I'll come to the top bit because I can't even, okay, let's pop that on in a minute. It's not even going to fit. You can see how big this thing gets. Major problem is with this though, is the instruction sheet. They haven't updated the instruction sheet since 1968. It sounds absolutely crazy. The instructions, the blurb on that, now they might offer the version that come out in 2019, but this is the version that came out in 2014. The moulding's still the same, but with this particular version, I know the instructions were wrong. Basically, the putting it together was sort of fine, But when it comes to the paint, because this is based on the prototype versions, the versions that were flying before they actually put man in them to take them to the moon, the paintwork's different. The main thing on there is actually the part where, let's see, let's bring you in there. Yeah, it's to do with these black parts here. So the black on the instructions says it should actually go further up, and then around this top part of this ridge would be a solid band of black, with these black bits going up further as well. And unfortunately I was following the instructions, and I masked that off because I put black primer down to give a more solidness to that white, and I think it does work. If I just put white over white plastic, it would kind of have a bit more, it wouldn't look so solid. It kind of needs that to give it more, basically make it more solid and less translucent. But the problem is, that is what they did on those early prototype versions, the unmanned versions. What they actually found though is these things were sitting out on the launch pad under the very hot Florida sun, and of course, as we know, black absorbs the heat whereas the white reflects it. And in here you've got these big things of cooled down liquid oxygen, and the fuels get to sub-zero conditions. The problem is the Florida sunlight is hitting these bits and heating it up. And so they, the part where it was all around there, they actually reduced the amount of white paint they ended up using, or reduced the amount of black, so that they have more white to reduce the heat getting absorbed by it into those fuel tanks. Now there is a pattern to these, and the idea is, especially like around the top bit, so that as it rotates, you can see that there's a, and you've got each fin's got A, B, C, and D. And so then by looking at the footage, they could see what orientation it was just by looking at that code there. So if you've got the white towards you, you know that's fin D facing you. So as it was to rotate. So it's actually quite clever. A bit like yeah, those little roundel sort of things they put on crash test dummies. It's that sort of thing, so they can see the orientation of it. So they do need the black sort of paint on there, but that's something to bear in mind. Look at reference photos, take the masking from reference photos, not from the instructions. The instructions are actually for the prototype, not the Saturn V. So if you're thinking you're making the version that went to the moon, no, you're not. You're making the version that they were testing unmanned in low Earth orbit. So yeah, just to put you there. Oh, and the different Apollo versions, some of them did have slightly different paint versions on there. So if you're deciding that you want to do Apollo 12, the one with Al Bean, if you want to do Apollo 13, with Jim Lovell's one, the one that never actually made it to the moon, make sure you look at the reference photos, even as much as the internals things did seem to be different colours. Some had that zinc, that green zinc chromate colour, some had tanks that were buff colour. So it kind of really is a bit, yeah, literally each one was made bespoke, and obviously as things were progressing they adapted on the fly. So if they found improvements, they would adjust things as they went down. You know, these weren't made in bulk for the actual Saturn Vs. So that's a little bit of a summary, probably not so much of a rant. Hope I haven't gone on too much there, but just wanted to give you a bit of an overview of the good points and the bad points, and if I were to do it again, and I'm not planning to, but never say never, if I were to do it again, how you'd look at doing it differently. Maybe think about how you want it to be presented, and then go full speed down that particular route. As I said, they tried to do it as a best of both worlds, but in reality they've only really got the average of both worlds, which does still make it a fun and interactive and dynamic model. I just don't think it's quite as good as what it could be. And to be honest, the world really is crying out for another moulding of these. I don't think it's going to happen. If they had done it, they would have already done it to coincide with the 50th anniversary of the moon landings. So there's no real incentive to do it now, and people are still going to be going out to buy these. So I've been Rob. Thanks very much for watching. That has been, I know it's been a long time coming, but that is, I can now finally say that is complete, and I finally got that base made of Revell's Apollo Saturn V, and that is 1:144 scale, reference number 04909. Thanks very much for watching. Do hit subscribe. If you like this, do hit like. Genuinely do appreciate it. Feel free to ask any questions. Let me know how you get on with your builds. Thanks for watching. Have fun.